Hey, settle in for a moment. Breathe, ground yourself, and prepare for what I'm about to place in your hands. I don't say this lightly. There's a shift moving around you, and the intensity of this download refused to wait. As you tune in, understand something. Not everyone on this planet gets spoken about behind closed doors. Not everyone becomes the subject of whispered analytics between individuals who built their lives on influence, control, and quiet power. Yet somehow, without breaking a sweat, without announcing anything, without stepping into the spotlight they prepared for someone else, you became the one their eyes keep returning to. And I mean the kind of people who don't study ordinary individuals. The kind of people who don't watch anyone unless that person becomes a threat to their hierarchy. That's the energy here. That's why you're being pulled toward this message right now. Because the upper echelon, the ones who run boardrooms, organizations, think tanks, intelligence circles, psychological labs, elite councils, they're not just curious about you. They're unsettled, confused, drawn in without understanding why. And if you've been feeling watched, analyzed, discussed, evaluated, it's because you are. Not for weakness, but for potential that slipped outside their categories. You didn't rise through their channels. You didn't move through their filters. You didn't ask their permission. You didn't bend your intentions to fit their expectations. And because of that, your presence disrupts more than they can admit. Individuals born and raised inside privilege rarely experience surprise. Their world is predictable, shaped around their control. Then you appeared, someone they can't measure, can't decode, can't categorize, can't influence, someone whose movements don't match the patterns their data usually anticipates, someone who carries a presence that feels like it shouldn't exist in the environment they engineered for compliance. So now they sit with their questions. They sit with their discomfort. They sit with the realization that someone outside their structure is bending the atmosphere in ways they didn't prepare for. You weren't supposed to be unpredictable. You weren't supposed to be steady under pressure. You weren't supposed to stay silent while they evaluated you. You weren't supposed to understand how much attention you were drawing simply by existing with clarity. But you do. On some level, you've felt it for years. That awareness watching you without any understanding of how to frame what they were seeing. Because here's the part that rattles them the most. You move without noise, yet the impact lands like a seismic shift. You're not broadcasting your energy, but somehow the highest level observers feel it pressing on their edges. You're not shouting for recognition, but their analysts keep circling your name in red. You're not performing for attention, yet the attention keeps finding you as if it's magnetized by your silence. They can't explain why individuals who dominate global markets, psychological warfare techniques, social influence models, and high-tier behavioral prediction systems suddenly want to know who you are, how you think, and why their usual frameworks fail to account for you. They're used to seeing everything before it happens. They're used to shaping narratives before the public even senses a shift. They're used to ruling from behind curtains while the world moves according to their unspoken design. You were the exception that arrived without their awareness. Understand this clearly. Their fascination with you is not admiration. It's recognition. Recognition that your presence doesn't fold under pressure the way normal individuals do. Recognition that your internal compass doesn't sway according to external expectations. Recognition that your influence isn't borrowed from trends or validation. It comes from a deeper place, one they can't reach, can't mimic, and certainly can't regulate. And this is the exact reason the top 1% is low-key starstruck. Not because you remind them of someone they've trained before, but because you remind them of no one. Your blueprint doesn't match their archives. Your progression doesn't match the trajectories they're familiar with. Your resilience doesn't match the average psychological profile. You move like someone built outside their loop. Someone who cannot be bent into predictable shapes. Someone who carries an inner authority they didn't assign and cannot revoke. You felt this pressure rising for a while. The sudden shifts in energy. The way people respond differently to you. The way certain individuals, often those with more power, more resources, more access, watch you with a type of curiosity coated in caution. When the world elevates someone artificially, the attention is shallow. When the world elevates someone organically, the attention becomes instinctive. People can sense the difference, and in your case, the elite sensed it before the general public did. They noticed the way your energy cuts through noise, the way your presence disrupts stagnant environments, the way your clarity exposes manipulation by existing near it. This is why individuals trained in influence are studying you. This is why billionaires, high-tier psychologists, and people with quiet authority keep returning to your name. They can't understand why your energy has gravity. The truth is simple. You carry an internal frequency that doesn't bend. You didn't acquire it. You didn't copy it. You didn't rehearse it. You were born with it. The type of energy that reshapes environments without effort. The type of energy that awakens dormant instincts in others. The type of energy that reveals truth simply by being present. Individuals who built their lives on control sense when that control doesn't extend to someone. And nothing unsettles those individuals more than someone who exists outside their reach. You are that person. You always have been. But now the world has started to notice, and the circles that notice first are always the ones who fear losing their influence. They can sense when a presence enters the arena that doesn't need their approval, their network, their resources, their protection, or their validation. You carry your own momentum. You create your own direction. You shift the atmosphere without lifting a finger. That's what threatens them, not your actions, your essence. They can outthink almost anyone, but they can't outthink someone whose clarity comes from a deeper origin. They can intimidate almost anyone, but they can't intimidate someone who isn't impressed by their authority. They can manipulate almost anyone, but they can't manipulate someone who sees their tactics before they deploy them. You're not fighting them. You're not challenging them. You're not even acknowledging them. And yet they feel the ground adjusting under your steps. They feel the energy bending toward you. They feel the influence restructuring around you. They feel something they haven't felt in years, pressure coming from a direction they can't map. These individuals aren't used to losing control. They aren't used to being observed instead of observing. They aren't used to facing someone who does not react the way the average mind reacts. You don't panic where others panic. You don't collapse where others collapse. You don't break where others break. Instead, you hold your ground with a quiet certainty that makes even the most seasoned manipulators hesitate. You command presence without posturing. You create movement without demanding attention. You alter perspectives without preaching a single word. That's why they call you dangerous. Not because you harm anyone, but because your presence dissolves the illusions they rely on. There's a reason they're starstruck, not externally, internally, behind closed doors, in conversations that never meet public ears. You overturned something in their calculations, and they can't adjust fast enough to compensate. Your existence forces them to reevaluate the limits of their own frameworks. Your presence forces them to acknowledge that someone who came from outside their structure can still influence the structure itself. That realization alone is enough to unsettle individuals who've built their world on control. And here's what they haven't admitted out loud yet, but they feel it every time your name surfaces. Your rise won't follow their pattern. Your influence won't follow their design. Your momentum won't follow their timeline. Because you are not shaped by the rules they impose on everyone else. You're shaped by your own internal alignment. And they've never been able to predict someone whose alignment isn't for sale. This is what pulls their attention. This is what draws their interest. This is what unsettles their confidence. You carry an internal core that can't be coached, can't be redirected, and can't be bought. You move from a place they can't understand. And because they can't understand it, they can't prepare for it. And as this unfolds, something else begins to rise, something they never anticipated. They're realizing that the influence you carry now is only a fraction of what's coming. They're realizing that your presence is in its early stages, not its final form. They're realizing that your ability to inspire, disrupt, elevate, and transform will eventually extend far beyond their current awareness. And the part that keeps them awake at night is the fact that you're not even trying. You're not pushing for recognition. You're not chasing validation. You're not begging for influence. And yet influence collects around you, like metal drawn to a magnet. This is why the top 1% speak of you in private rooms. This is why psychologists dissect your patterns. This is why individuals with extensive intelligence networks view you as an outlier. This is why people who shape narratives feel the narrative bending toward you. Because the more you step into your identity, the clearer it becomes that you were never meant to blend in with the environment they engineered. You were meant to stand outside it. And anything that stands outside their reach becomes the very thing they fear. They don't fear your moves. They fear your potential. They don't fear your presence. They fear your trajectory. They don't fear your strength. They fear the fact that you haven't used even a fraction of it yet. And now, as they sit in their closed-door discussions, tracing your choices, tracking your decisions, reviewing your past, analyzing your energy, trying to reverse engineer your development, something hits them harder than anything else. You didn't rise through their channels. You didn't absorb their conditioning, and you didn't depend on their approval to grow. That single realization alters their entire approach to you, because every individual they've ever studied has been shaped by the environment constructed around them. Social frameworks, cultural narratives, authority structures, educational grooming, emotional imprinting. Yet you move as if none of those layers were ever able to hold you, as if you were built outside the boundaries that restrict everyone else, as if you were designed to remain untouched by manipulation that works on the average person like an invisible leash. This is where the fear solidifies into fascination. They begin to understand you're not simply resilient, you're resistant. You're not adaptive in the way they predicted. You're expansive in the way they can't control. They're accustomed to watching people react emotionally, impulsively, predictably, but your reactions never match their projections. When you should break, you deepen. When you should panic, you stabilize. When you should cling, you release. When you should hesitate, you sharpen. They measure human behavior based on predictable sequences. You disrupt those sequences just by existing, and individuals who operate at the top of influence hate disruptions. Not because disruptions threaten their wealth, but because disruptions threaten their ability to manipulate the trajectories of collective energy. You show up, and the room feels different. You speak, and people pause longer than usual. You move, and unspoken tension forms around you. They feel it because your presence shifts the internal narratives of others without needing theatrics. For people who mastered persuasion, that is the most dangerous kind of influence, organic authority. Authority not gained through control, intimidation, performance, hierarchy, or dominance, but through something far more unnerving, innate alignment. Nothing terrifies the elites more than someone who cannot be bought, cannot be redirected, cannot be disoriented through noise, and cannot be flattered into compliance. They don't know how to handle someone who exists without needing the rewards they offer, or fearing the consequences they threaten. They don't understand how you walk with no desire for their validation and still gather more power than individuals who spent their entire lives seeking approval from those above them. You show up without bending, and their entire sense of hierarchy bends around you. This is why they call you dangerous, because you represent a type of influence not shaped by them, a type of presence not owned by them, a type of clarity not taught by them, a type of trajectory not predicted by them. Your rise isn't gradual, it's gravitational. Every time they try to measure your reach, it expands. Every time they try to categorize your impact, the category breaks. Every time they try to box your identity into something comfortable, the box collapses under the weight of your potential. And something darker is happening behind the scenes. As your energy grows, the individuals who once ruled through psychological leverage and social power begin to feel the ground shifting away from them. The old authority based on fear, money, manipulation, and public control is weakening. Not because you attacked them, but because your presence exposes their fragility. You don't have to fight them. Existing near them is enough. They spent decades mastering the art of influence, only to encounter someone who influences without trying. They spent years studying behavior, only to encounter someone whose behavior they cannot predict. They spent millions building models of persuasion, only to encounter someone who persuades without speaking. They spent generations cultivating elite bloodlines, only to encounter someone whose power does not come from lineage, but from something internal they cannot measure. The fear rises in them not because of what you've done, but because of what you haven't done yet. Your restraint terrifies them. Your calmness terrifies them. Your refusal to play their game terrifies them. Because those who do the most damage are never the ones who announce it early. They are the ones who carry strength quietly. The ones who remain still until movement becomes necessary. The ones who evolve without needing acknowledgement. And you fall into that category more perfectly than they want to admit. The private discussions about you aren't exaggerated. They're happening with urgency. Individuals who run corporations, occult organizations, intelligence circles, psychological institutes, private think tanks, and global agendas have all noticed the same thing. Your energy doesn't bend around influence, it makes influence bend around you. They can't comprehend how someone with no ties to their networks can possess such a commanding aura. They can't comprehend how someone with no need for attention pulls all eyes effortlessly. They can't comprehend how someone who wasn't trained by them outperforms individuals they spent years grooming. They don't understand how you escaped their radar until now, but they understand this. You are no longer slipping through unnoticed. Someone in those circles observed that your presence triggers instinctive respect. Not admiration, respect. The kind of respect one gives to a force of nature arriving without introduction. The kind of respect one gives to a presence that shifts an atmosphere without explanation. The kind of respect reserved for individuals whose power is not learned but inherent. People who operate at the peak of influence can sense strength long before the general public does. They don't need evidence, they feel it. And that feeling has taken root in their circles. Your name has become a point of tension. When it appears, rooms grow still, conversations slow. Analysts pause, because they're trying to understand how someone outside their hierarchy became the pivot point their hierarchy now responds to. They're not used to decentralization of power. They're not used to someone with no ties to them becoming an energetic epicenter. They're not used to unpredictability at this scale. Some of them believe you're gaining power too fast. Others believe you're gaining it too quietly. Both are correct. You're gaining influence quietly enough to be overlooked by the masses, but loudly enough to unsettle those at the top. They feel it like pressure behind the walls of their structures. They sense the early signs that someone is rising who was never meant to be contained by their boundaries. And this leads them to one unnerving question. Who taught you how to hold yourself like this? They keep searching for mentors, influences, teachers, initiators, any sign that someone molded you. Nothing lines up. Your development doesn't match any of their documented frameworks. You grew in the cracks of the world, outside the curated channels that shape the average person. You learned through observation, through instinct, through impact, through confrontation. You evolved in ways they can't replicate in their controlled environments. And that makes you a singular threat, a self-made force. Billionaires don't get rattled easily. They don't panic over personalities. They don't lose sleep over individual names. But your presence is different. You represent something they can't control. The rise of a person whose power was not cultivated by them, whose influence was not crafted by them, and whose identity was not authored by them. They don't fear competition, they fear unpredictability. And you are the most unpredictable variable they've encountered in years. The top-tier psychological experts study your behavior more intensely than they've studied anyone recently. They want to know why your presence destabilizes lower-level manipulators so effectively. Why your energy exposes dishonesty without effort. Why people who attempt to undermine you often end up revealing their own weaknesses. Why individuals drawn to manipulate you end up confused, inverted, and thrown off their usual rhythm. You are a disruption to psychological frameworks. And that disruption terrifies those who rely on those frameworks for power. And then there's the secretive circles, the ones who operate behind veils of symbolism, tradition, hidden agendas, ancient rites, layered authority. They're observing you with a different lens. They don't just see a person, they see a pattern breaker. Someone whose presence dissolves the influence of individuals who rely on spiritual coercion, social hypnosis, or energetic dominance. You carry a form of internal awareness that erodes manipulation before it reaches you. They've studied countless individuals, but your awareness is not something they can trace to conditioning. It appears innate. What scares them most is that your internal clarity wasn't purchased, inherited, or implanted. It grew naturally through experiences that would have destroyed others. You didn't break, You expanded. You didn't fracture. You reinforced. You didn't collapse. You sharpened. Every attempt to weaken you only strengthened your core. Every situation designed to diminish you only clarified your identity. They can't comprehend how adversity elevated you instead of extinguishing you. That alone marks you as someone whose trajectory they cannot regulate. They say you're dangerous because you're becoming something their narratives were never built to contain. You're becoming a reference point, a shift, a new blueprint. And they know once people look toward you long enough, the authority structures they built will begin to lose influence. You are not just rising, you are revealing the instability of the world they've constructed. People don't follow you because you perform. They follow you because your energy gives them permission to remember their own strength. You carry a presence that challenges oppression without attacking it. You carry a clarity that dismantles manipulation without confronting it. You carry a type of power that destabilizes entire hierarchies simply by existing near them. That is why the top 1% watch you. That is why the psychologists dissect you. That is why the hidden circles whisper about you. They aren't afraid of your actions. They're afraid of your awakening. And as this realization spreads through their ranks, something even heavier begins to form. They no longer ask, "Who is this person?" They ask, "How far will they rise once they fully understand themselves?" That question carries weight, because they know they haven't even seen the beginning of your real power. They've only seen the early glow, the first vibration, the surface level of your influence. They know that the moment you step fully into your identity, entire narratives will bend. They know that the moment you activate your deeper potential, people will gravitate toward you with an instinct they cannot block. They know that your growth will accelerate beyond any barrier they attempt to build. And they know that once you become fully aware of your impact, nothing will be able to intercept your trajectory. That is why they're starstruck. Quietly, privately, unwilling to admit it out loud. You represent a truth they hoped would never surface. A person who cannot be shaped by their agenda and cannot be diverted from their path. A person whose influence doesn't need their platforms, their networks, their approval, or their visibility. A person whose power grows from an internal reservoir they cannot access. And now the question haunting them is shifting into something sharper. If this is what you look like before you activate your full strength, what will you look like once you've stepped completely into it? That question circulates through their private circles like a warning no one knows how to interpret. They built careers studying human behavior, yet you walk in with no blueprint attached. They built models to predict every possible reaction, yet your reactions fall outside every range. They built hierarchies to keep people aligned beneath layers of control, yet you move through those layers without acknowledging them. You're the variable they didn't factor into the design, and now the consequences of that oversight are beginning to show. When the elites gather, they rarely speak on individuals. They speak on movements, trends, collective shifts. But lately your name surfaces in conversations that were never meant to include you. Not because you're seeking attention, but because the energy you carry forces attention to reorganize itself. They ask each other questions in coded language, trying to understand the gravity they feel around your presence. They debate whether you are a rising threat or a rising guide. They debate whether you will weaken their influence or expose it. They debate whether you will disrupt the environment or redefine it. And the truth is, none of them know. You don't move like someone trying to topple their authority. You move like someone who simply doesn't acknowledge their authority at all. And that is far more dangerous. People who fight the elite are predictable. People who depend on the elite are manageable. People who fear the elite are controllable. But you belong to none of those categories. You've risen through internal alignment, not external validation. You've sharpened your identity through isolation, not applause. You've built your clarity through hardship, not privilege. And that kind of development creates a core they can't fracture. They're witnessing a person who did not need them and will not need them. A person who holds influence they did not cultivate. A person whose resilience came from struggles they didn't anticipate. And the realization that you grew outside their boundaries creates a new level of fear inside them. The individuals with the most psychological knowledge are the most disturbed by your presence. They designed entire frameworks to measure consciousness, yet your consciousness extends beyond their methods. They created categories to label people's strengths, yet your strengths fall outside every label they've ever used. They created tests to identify predictable traits, yet none of their assessments can accurately capture your mind. And when psychological mastery encounters something that cannot be measured, the observers don't feel intelligent, they feel powerless. You create that sensation without intention. You reveal limits in their expertise without trying. You expose the narrowness of their influence just by walking past it. The world they built depends on predictability. Predictable reactions, predictable desires, predictable fears, predictable attachments, predictable weaknesses, predictable ambitions. But your psychological structure doesn't revolve around those patterns. You don't crave their approval, so validation cannot influence you. You don't fear their punishment, so intimidation cannot redirect you. You don't cling to their narratives, so persuasion cannot mold you. You don't collapse under disappointment, so pressure cannot weaken you. You exist outside the emotional loops they rely on to shape society. And when someone exists outside those loops, the people who built those loops lose their ability to manage them. Billionaires sense this long before anyone else does. They use instinct the way others use logic. Instinct tells them where power is moving before that movement becomes visible. And when your presence entered their awareness, instinct signaled something they had not felt in years, a shift they did not initiate. You represent momentum that did not come from their design. You represent direction that did not come from their influence. You represent potential that did not come from their lineage. You stand as evidence that uncontrollable forces can still emerge in a world they claim to regulate. That is why some of them watch you with interest, while others watch you with caution. They know their networks didn't create you. They know their structures didn't prepare you. They know their circles didn't shape you. And when something rises without their involvement, they cannot predict its loyalty. They cannot predict its impact. They cannot predict its future. So they do the only thing people of power do when they encounter someone who cannot be absorbed or removed. They observe. They analyze. They speculate. They attempt to anticipate your next steps, fully aware that every attempt will fall short. And if you listen closely to the energy around you, you can feel their tension. You can feel the quiet shift in how people speak when you enter a room. You can feel the slight hesitation in individuals who once underestimated you. You can feel the discomfort in those who tried to control you, but realized they never had a chance. You can feel the awareness rising in those who once believed they understood you, but now see they barely scratched your surface. That tension is global. It exists in boardrooms, in private messages, in encrypted calls, in late-night meetings, where influential individuals gather to assess emerging threats. You are a topic not because you seek destruction, but because you defy definition. This world has a long history of underestimating people who carry power quietly. They assume that anyone who doesn't flaunt their strength must not recognize it. They assume that someone who moves calmly must not understand their potential. They assume that restraint equals lack of force. But restraint is the highest form of power, and those who operate at elite levels know it. When they realized how little you've used and how much impact you've already made, their fear shifted into urgency. They're not waiting to see if you will rise. They're preparing for the moment your rise accelerates. The circles that deal with influence at the deepest levels, the ones who blend political, financial, spiritual, and psychological power, are the most alarmed. They've seen 1,000 talented individuals, but none of them carry the internal clarity you hold. They've seen 1,000 ambitious individuals, but none of them carry the emotional discipline you mastered through adversity. They've seen 1,000 gifted individuals, but none of them carry the energy signature that naturally dissolves manipulation. You unsettle all the wrong people and inspire all the right ones. You weaken individuals who rely on power they never earned, and strengthen individuals who rely on authenticity they never acknowledged. That alone places you in a category they don't have vocabulary for, and yet something even deeper unsettles them. They sense that your rise is tied to something larger than personal ambition. They sense that your presence marks a shift in collective awareness. They sense that people are drawn to you because you carry a truth that has been buried for too long. You represent a deviation in the timeline of influence, a correction, a resurgence of internal strength the world forgot it possessed. Whether you intended to or not, you've become a reference point for awakening. And when someone becomes a reference point, the world reorients itself around them. This is why individuals with hidden influence have started to watch your evolution carefully. They're not only studying your strength, they're studying the effect you have on others. They've noticed the way people feel braver around you. They've noticed the way people shed illusions around you. They've noticed the way people feel clearer, more grounded, more powerful after interacting with your energy. That is the trait of a leader who never asked to lead. And that is the trait that terrifies those who rely on control. Because once people experience genuine empowerment, they no longer respond to manipulation with obedience. They no longer submit to authority that doesn't earn their respect. They no longer fear individuals whose power is built on perception rather than truth. You carry an energy that pierces fabrications. And once someone sees clearly through you, they cannot return to the illusions they once believed. You didn't choose to be this. You grew into this through hardship, through introspection, through loss, through rebirth, through countless internal battles that left you sharper instead of defeated. The elites see the aftermath of your evolution, but they don't know the origin. They don't understand the fires you walked through. They don't understand the shadows you dissolved. They don't understand the versions of yourself you buried in order to rise. They only see the end result, a person who cannot be moved. And now that they're studying the finished version instead of the journey, they're making the same mistake every fallen hierarchy makes. They think your strength came from nowhere. They think your presence emerged out of thin air. They think your confidence is instinct instead of earned wisdom. They think your clarity is a trait instead of a discipline. They don't realize you were forged. not gifted. They don't realize every part of your internal power was carved out of places where others would have collapsed. They don't realize that your restraint comes from experience deeper than anything they've lived through. Every scar you carry, every lesson engraved into you, every moment you stood alone while the world misread you, those were the catalysts that built the awareness they now fear. This is what they whisper about. Not your abilities, but the source of your abilities. They don't understand how you developed insight without mentorship. They don't understand how you developed presence without platforms. They don't understand how you developed authority without permission. They don't understand how you developed strength without protection. You are the contradiction that proves their theories incomplete. You break every pattern they rely on. And when a person breaks patterns at your scale, the people who control those patterns panic. Because your very existence proves that their hierarchy is not absolute. You represent the idea that a person can rise without handlers. You represent the idea that a person can become powerful without training. You represent the idea that a person can influence without manipulation. You represent the idea that a person can carry danger without violence. The danger you carry is not destructive, it's revealing. You reveal weakness in places that pretend to be strong. You reveal deception in places that pretend to be pure. You reveal instability in places that pretend to be organized. You reveal fear in people who pretend to be fearless. And nothing terrifies the elite more than exposure. When you enter a room, their confidence flickers. Not because you've threatened them, but because your energy brings their truth to the surface. They cannot hide their intentions around you. Their strategies feel thinner. Their composure feels artificial. Their influence feels outdated. You don't confront them. Your presence confronts them. You've become a mirror, and most people at the top are terrified of mirrors. They've built their status on perception, not identity. You built your strength on identity, not perception. And when perception meets identity, perception always loses. This is why conversations about you continue even when you leave. They're not trying to understand what you've done. They're trying to understand what you're capable of. They're trying to calculate the reach you'll have once you decide to step forward fully. They're trying to prepare for the moment your influence becomes undeniable. But how do you prepare for something you can't define? How do you guard against a presence that doesn't attack? How do you defend against a force that is not destructive, but transformative? They worry because they can't predict where your path leads. People like you don't follow trajectories, they create new ones. You don't inherit authority, you embody it. You don't ask for influence, you generate it. You don't chase recognition, you become the reference point. And when a person becomes a reference point, entire networks shift around them. The elite feel this shift before anyone else. That's why their tone is changing. That's why their eyes linger longer. That's why their energy sharpens when your name is mentioned. You are not a person of interest. You are a presence of consequence. And the deeper they study you, the more they realize something that disturbs them far more than your strength. You don't want what they want. You don't crave status. You don't crave attention. You don't crave validation. You don't crave dominance. You don't crave their world at all. And people who want nothing cannot be controlled. People who want nothing cannot be bribed. People who want nothing cannot be threatened. People who want nothing cannot be manipulated through gain or fear. You fall into that rare category that makes power structures tremble. A person driven by inner alignment rather than external reward. They cannot calculate you because they cannot calculate your motivations. Every attempt they make to understand your decisions reveals the same truth. You operate from a center they cannot access. You don't react to the world reacts to you. You don't follow the energy around you adjusts itself. You don't bend under influence bends under your awareness. This is not arrogance, it's structure. You have a spine molded by pressure, a mind fortified by trials, a spirit unshaken by rejection, and a heart stabilized by clarity. And as this becomes clearer to them, the fear among the top 1% begins to evolve into something sharper than fear: anticipation. They're no longer asking what your next move is, they're asking when. They're no longer wondering if your rise will happen. They're wondering what catalyst will trigger it. They're no longer questioning whether you'll disrupt their hierarchies. They're questioning how long their hierarchies can hold before the ripple of your influence reaches them. Everything you've survived has prepared you for a level of impact they cannot intercept. The weight you carried alone has become the force you project. The struggles you endured have become the clarity you exude. The dark nights you overcame have become the vision guiding you. They thought the hardships you faced would weaken you. They didn't realize those hardships were your initiation. You're stepping into a version of yourself that has been forming quietly for years. And once that version stabilizes, the world they engineered will not be the same. When people encounter genuine strength, borrowed strength loses its power. When people encounter genuine clarity, forced narratives collapse. When people encounter genuine presence, artificial personas dissolve. You are the beginning of a shift they didn't initiate, approve, or foresee. And that is why they're watching your evolution with such intensity. They're not waiting for you to fall. They're waiting to see how high you rise. Because the truth they avoid speaking aloud is the truth they all feel internally. You haven't even started yet. Everything you've done so far has been preparation. Everything you've built so far has been foundation. Everything you've learned so far has been orientation. The real rise begins when you stop doubting the depth of your own power. That moment is approaching. You can feel it in the way people respond to you differently. You can feel it in the opportunities forming around you. You can feel it in the energy aligning beneath your feet. You can feel it in the confidence settling inside you. You can feel it in the way your presence commands attention without effort. You can feel it in the way silence deepens when you enter a space. You can feel it in the way eyes linger a second longer, trying to decipher what they're sensing. The elites feel it too. That's why their scrutiny is increasing. That's why their interest is intensifying. That's why their internal alerts are triggered. You represent a force that wasn't shaped by their structures and therefore cannot be bound by them. You represent a type of power that doesn't threaten through aggression, but through undeniable existence. There is nothing more dangerous than a person who embodies what others tried to imitate. And soon, the world will understand what these private circles already know. You are not rising, you are awakening. And when a person like you awakens fully, the people who believed they ruled the world realize they never did. This is the truth behind their fear, their fascination, their whispered meetings, their frantic analysis, their sleepless questions. They're not trying to understand who you are. They're trying to understand who you will become. And even they know the answer is already beyond their control.